Chapter 14. The Weight of Guilt. Mary Beth thought it would be best if she met with her parents alone first. She tried to call them several times, but was so nervous that she always hung up before the line connected. She had knots in her stomach as Johnny pulled out of the drive, and she was reluctant to start up the driveway. In fact, she was about to walk back towards town when her mother opened the front door. Mrs. Jameson called out, "Well, don't just stand there. You've come this far. You might as well come on inside." Her sister and brothers were anxious to see Mary Beth, but thought it was best to scurry upstairs until things were settled between her and their parents. As Mary Beth entered the house, her sister tried to catch her eye from the top of the stairs, but she just stared on with glassy eyes and a face as white as a sheet. The maid timidly poked her head out of a doorway and asked, "Ma'am, will you be wanting some tea while you talk? Or should I keep to the kitchen for now?" "No, tea will be fine, and perhaps some crackers, though I doubt anyone will be up to eating them. Still, a nibble might help calm some nerves." Mary Beth found her father already sitting at the side of the table, and her mother took the seat across from him. This left Mary Beth with the seat at the end, immediately between her parents. She expected this. This was typical of serious conversations with their children. After a moment of awkward silence with nobody knowing where to start, Mr. Jameson asked, "Now where is this Johnny of yours? You know I'll want to have a long private chat with him." Mary answered, "I told him it would be best if I came alone first. He's off for his regular meeting with Pastor Stevens." Her mother got to the point. "Well, young lady, what do you have to say for yourself in all this?" "I nearly let Alexander sweep me off my feet with your promptings. What a horrible thing that would have been, though I'm sure you're of a different opinion. We've learned some things about all that Alexander business that I'm sure you'll want to know, but that'll wait for the moment," her mother said. Then Mr. Jameson said, "There are more than 2 single men your age in the world, my dear, but why run off with any of them like that? You're so young you can hardly know what you want yourself, and then to be married on top of that. I felt like you just kept pushing more and more young men like Alexander on me, men that want to go in a completely different direction in their lives. I'm certain you'd never have approved of any young man that appealed to my heart, and I could never settle for someone like that two-faced Alexander." The mother began to say, "How would you know if we would or wouldn't have accepted a young man of your choosing? You never brought any to us. We surely would have given—" Mary Beth tried not to interrupt, but couldn't restrain herself. "You closed the door on Johnny before I even got to the point I could have brought him to you. You never gave him a chance from the first moment he was ever mentioned." "That's not true, darling. No doubt it would have been awkward to start, but we certainly wouldn't have closed our front door in his face," Mrs. Jameson protested. The father conceded. "I have to admit we did make that a very daunting thing for you to try. He had so many strikes against him from the start. He would have been hard-pressed to get out from behind that in my book." "Well," Mary Beth said, "strikes against him or not, he's now my husband. For everyone's sake, you'll have to work out your differences. It's too late to be undone, even if I wanted to, which I don't." The mother sighed and looked out the window. Then she said, "We would have had you stay with Alexander as our first choice over Johnny, and now we can even see the error in that." Her mother said no more, but looked to her father. Mary Beth then looked to him for a further explanation. "Yes, and now I even have to admit you're probably better off with Johnny." Mary Beth was shocked to hear such a thing coming from her dad's mouth and looked at him even more curiously than ever. The maid chose that moment to come in, and so the conversation temporarily ended. She poured and served the tea. She then placed the teapot and a plate of cheese and crackers on the table before scurrying back out. After word got around to Alexander about your elopement, he was quite upset. He suggested I bribe some judges to get the whole thing undone under the table. Not only that, he threatened us, said now we were out of the game and he'd at least have our house in the end. I don't know what all that's about. Our house is quite secure." Her mother explained further. "We didn't really understand when you told us it was like a business proposition to him. I thought you were over-exaggerating. You have to admit you've been known for that before, dear. We're so sorry about that. And now we're all going to have to pay for it, or so it would seem. Mary Beth opened her mouth to protest, but her mother motioned for her to hold her tongue and interjected. Whether with Johnny or with someone else, I'm afraid you've rushed into this too soon, and there'll be difficulties because of it, mark my words. Her father admitted, We shouldn't have pushed you so hard, and I suppose we should have at least met this Johnny of yours. For your part, you panicked, and you really should have let us in on this. Maybe it would have brought us to our senses beforehand. Mary Beth conceded, Well, now what's done is done, and we'll all just have to make the best of it. I'll be honest, it has been difficult. There have been so many unexpected adjustments to be made, and all nearly overnight. What would you suggest? Well, darling, your Johnny already meets with the pastor, and you already meet with the pastor's wife, so why not meet them together, couple to couple? We'd offer, but I'm afraid that would be incredibly awkward for everyone. Now that she realized they were going to be okay as a family, Mary Beth choked up and could say no more for a time. Her father wasn't sure what was happening, but the mother understood and immediately wrapped her arms around Mary Beth and motioned for her husband to do so as well. Mary Beth wept. Mom, Dad, I love you. I've missed you so much, and that has been the hardest part of all. At that point, it seems the siblings decided it was about time to join the meeting. Then Mary Beth was getting and giving hugs with everyone. The sound of a car barreling up the drive brought their reunion to a halt. Everyone went to investigate and found Mr. Samuels stepping out of his car. Mr. Samuels called up. I just got off the phone with Pastor Stevens. He said I'd find you here, Mary Beth. The word is all over town. There's a standoff brewing at the orphanage, with the Klan on one side and Johnny on the other. I'm on my way to see what I can do. I thought you ought to know. With that, he hopped back in his car and was off. Mr. Jameson's eyes went wide. His wife put her hand over her gaping mouth. Mary Beth looked around helplessly as she wondered what to do. Gerald, the father instructed, your mother and I are going to go with Mary Beth and try to have a look. As soon as we've gone, I want you to lock the doors and stay put. We'll try to call when we figure anything out. As Johnny raced toward Oakwood, Eliza was getting ready for bed. Suddenly, she felt like her heart would nearly stop. For the first time, she let the doll, Johnny's gift, out of her sight. She realized that she left it by the swing set. She rushed off in only her dark crimson nightgown and bare feet to retrieve her most prized possession. Eliza liked to imagine that through the doll's eyes, Johnny could see her tucked safely into bed each night. It used to help her to go to sleep knowing that Johnny looked in on her and the doll served to take that place. Eliza ran right to the doll, tied with the string to stay in the swing. It was just as she'd left it running off to chase butterflies, one of her favorite activities. She forgot to come back for the doll when Mary Sue called for dinner. Eliza felt ashamed, as if she'd somehow let Johnny down in forgetting the doll. She thought, what if I didn't remember? Something terrible might have happened to it outdoors. It might have stormed or anything. Eliza Beth, with a contented smile, was hugging the doll while swinging her torso back and forth. Then she heard a car racing down the street. Not knowing who it might be, and being on the side of the home nearest the street, she darted into some bushes that marked the corner of the house. The car sped past, honking loudly, and this alarmed Eliza greatly. She plucked up her courage to come out and make a run for the back door when a dark figure sprinted past. She just hunkered down and remained hidden. Eliza Beth thought she heard the voices of Johnny and Miss Johnson coming from the front of the home, but she couldn't be sure. As she leaned out and strained to listen, she heard the Klansmen coming down the street. She saw their robes clear as day because of how white they were. She suspected the same group had burned her home. She edged back into the bushes and further toward the backside of the home. Eliza Beth began to shiver from fear and because a cool breeze had picked up as the sun went down. She gave up all hope of slipping away inside as the men continued to gather at the front. It seemed any attempt to escape unnoticed was impossible, even out of the backside of the bushes. Then all the other people began to gather across the street, and Eliza was afraid someone was bound to see her and tell the men. Then Eliza noticed the mountain. She could just see his right leg, right arm, and shoulder, and part of one eye peering out of its white hole. Elizabeth was particularly afraid of him and wondered if he might really be a giant. She wondered if it was the same man she saw while returning from trying to find the park. Most of the spectators also noticed the mountain standing there the moment they arrived. It seemed uncanny how he didn't seem to move at all. He gave no occasional swing of an arm or twist of a wrist, not so much as an occasional nod of the head or look around. Some thought, I do believe the poor fellow has fallen asleep standing there. A few of the spectators on the side street thought they saw Elizabeth cowering in the bush, or at least someone they couldn't quite make out. Some might have been ignorant enough of black folks, or perhaps even afraid of them in other circumstances, but most would not have turned down a known liar and a thief of a child over to these men. Those who lived nearby knew Eliza had a sharp tongue, but she wasn't a troublemaker, or anything of the sort. While it remained just immediate neighbors, there was no threat of someone alerting the Klan. Then Eliza thought she saw someone flagging a hand at her. She slowly and cautiously turned her head. It was darker across the street under the trees, and it took her eyes a minute to adjust. Then she saw a young woman looking right at her. After a moment more, she realized it was Johnny's Mary Beth. Mary Beth was stunned to see little Eliza, the root cause of the whole scene, right there under everyone's nose. When the woman from the crowd blurted out the mayor's name, all eyes were on her and the mayor, and Mary Beth took the chance to run across to the bushes. Entering through the side gate, her shocked father darted after her. Mary helped Eliza out the back side of the bushes and ran her back to the old barn. After that, more strangers from all over town began to show up, and Eliza's place in the bushes couldn't have remained secret. Her mother remained outside with the crowd. She saw the three enter the well shed and knew they were safe enough. She watched to see what Johnny would do now. Once inside the old well shed, Mr. Jameson scolded. "Mary Beth, where's your sense, young lady? What if that mob had seen you with this girl? Why can't you just stay out of this?" "Father," Mary Beth whispered, "how can you suggest we do anything else? We couldn't leave Eliza Beth there to be found by them. Here, take her up in the extra folds of your jacket. The child is absolutely frozen." She pushed Eliza into her father's arms and helped wrap the open coat around her. Once Eliza had snuggled her cold forehead down into Mr. Jameson's fur-lined collar, he no longer felt that his daughter could have done anything else. Mr. Jameson began to whisper soothing things to Eliza, things like, there now. We'll be safe here. Or I'm sure your friend Johnny is doing fine." Mary Beth smiled and laid her head on her father's shoulder, as she remembered him soothing her aches and fears in a similar fashion not so many years earlier. Out front, several of the Klansmen began to slip away, but two of the men weren't retreating. One man who had been standing nearest to Oakwood thought he'd seen something moving in the back. With the sky now completely black, but only showing a couple of stars, he couldn't be sure. He motioned to the man next to him, and they went around back to explore. As the two white-clad figures rounded the back of the home, they first inspected the now empty bushes at both corners of the home. It was clear to see, even in the dark, that the yard itself was vacant, so they went back to the old barn. They began at the corner opposite the well shed and walked along. They came to only a few doors, but none looked operable at all. The second man began to complain. "Jake, what's the idea of dragging me off? There ain't anything here. You've been staring into the dark too. Hello, what's this here?" He pointed to the loosened boards in the well shed where Mary Beth, Mr. Jameson, and Eliza Beth had slipped in. The weathering made it obvious the boards were recently disturbed. "See there, Bill?" Jake replied, holding his finger to his lips as he whispered. "We best be having us a look in here before we call off our search." Slipping inside, the two men found Mary Beth and Eliza Beth, now in Mr. Jameson's jacket, huddled together. They were unaware of Mr. Jameson because he'd gone off to find a tool for defense. Bill, the larger of the two men, went behind them, grabbed Mary Beth by each arm, and yanked her up off her feet. Jake hoisted Eliza, none too gently, right over his left shoulder as if she was a sack of potatoes. Mr. Jameson came along with a shovel he found as soon as he heard struggling and his daughter's protests. He came out of the opening behind the two men, but they were moving their captives along at a quick pace. They had Eliza Beth, the one they had come for, and their business was all but through. The silence just fell over the crowd from the clicking gun hammers as the two men rounded the corner of the home. Widow Jackson broke the silence, calling down from her cupola. "What do you gents mean by all this rioting in front of my house? Thought there was a trouble brewing, and I took the liberty to hand out a few of my favorite arms to my neighbors. At that, the widow broke off because she saw the man with Eliza. With the struggle Mary Beth was making, everyone's attention turned to the approaching group. Johnny balled up both fists and his face turned red. With clenched teeth, he seethed, "Take your hands off from them. What business?" Bill pushed Mary Beth towards Johnny, who caught her and steadied her. The man said, "There's your family, son. No harm meant. We have what we came for, and I believe we'll be going. We'll be taking her over to—" "Not so fast, Mayor," added the chief. "This is a child, not some sack of rocks. I demand your man treat her with a bit more care. I don't think I will be letting you take her away with you. If there's to be any transporting, it's going to be done legally in the police car and in the morning." The man with Eliza Beth carried her straight into the middle of the Klan, stopping next to the mountain and directly behind Mayor Phillips. The mayor simply ignored the chief and signaled his men to head out. Suddenly, many things happened all at once. Widow Jackson fired a warning shot off into the air, while Chief Barton grabbed Mayor Phillips, who had just holstered his gun. The chief tried to wrestle him out of the crowd with the intent of handcuffing him. Other Klansmen knocked the chief back to the steps. Mary's father tried to trip up the nearest Klansman with the handle of the shovel, but only caused the man a moment's stumble. The most striking thing, however, was that the mountain moved. Like lightning, he grabbed Bill across the face with his enormous right hand. His thumb was in Bill's right ear and his middle finger in the left. He then proceeded to lift Bill straight off the ground by his head. In the confusion, Johnny wrested Eliza free and brought her up on the porch. The few people who had the guns off in the shadows had come in close to the porch. It was actually Christine, her husband, and a few other close neighbors. Now they were set for a standoff, both groups with their guns held ready but not leveled at anyone. The widow had said, "My dear departed husband always said never point the gun at anyone, not even an enemy, till you have to. He was always so conscious towards others." The mountain threw Bill down to the ground while he reached up with his free hand and pulled off his own hood. "Now listen to me," he bellowed. "It ain't right what we done to this child's family. Now I know none of us meant it, except maybe old Jonas. Still, we did it, and it ain't right what we're doing now. I know that in my bones." "Little Tom," the mayor scolded, "stop your bellowing and put your hood back on. It just don't seem to fit me no more, Jonas, and it never set right with me what we done. All these years thinking I had taken part in something that killed a little baby. I had nightmares now and then. Then when I had my daughter 3 years ago, the nightmares have come at least every other night. There's my daughter in her crib with flames licking all around her. I tell you, it's a judgment on me, and I won't be a party to adding another to it." With that, little Tom stepped over beside Johnny, nearly knocking other men to the ground in the process, and turned his face against his old partners. The whole thing seemed to end in a stalemate with both sides of equal strength and resolve. Johnny thought that was a whole lot better than how it had started. Pastor Stevens and Mrs. Knorr returned to this scene. The pastor was beaming a big grin ear to ear as though he had heard a fantastic joke. Had he not come back with what he regarded as fantastic news, he would have wondered about the change of affairs that had taken place in his absence. Jovially, Pastor Stevens called out, "Say, Mayor, I didn't know you were adopted. I just saw the record myself over in the clerk's office. I bet your men didn't know it either, leastwise not that your birth parents were both Jewish. Clear as it can be, your original name was Jonas Ezekiel Zilber. I'm no expert on names, so I could be wrong on that count. Still, it doesn't sound like a Klan-approved name to me. If that doesn't beat everything, a Jewish man as chief Klansman." The Klan regarded Jews little better than they did black folks. In fact, they nearly regarded anyone with a family heritage outside of Western Europe as an enemy. "Lies, all lies. I don't believe a word you say," the mayor retorted. "You're just trying to muddy the issue." "Well, there's time enough tomorrow to verify all the facts," the chief added, now sporting a smile as big as the pastor's grin. After bringing down the leader in public disgrace, the rest of the group quickly lost their resolve and began to slink away into the night in greater number. Widow Jackson, who had come out to her front steps, held her rifle at her side. She said to herself, Just in case they try anything else. Just in case. After the Klan slipped away, the crowd began to thin out as well. Soon it was just the immediate neighbors. They all came inside the home's fence and were now standing in the yard talking quietly with one another. All lived beside the home for years, and none had ever said a word to another living soul about Eliza. Beyond that, there had been no outward support of the home. But tonight some of them had been ready with their guns, and others had borrowed some from Widow Jackson. Now that everyone knew of Eliza's presence, they were discussing setting up a neighborhood watch. No longer would the duty fall on Widow Jackson's shoulders alone. Miss Johnson just came out to see if it was safe to bring the children upstairs. She was standing just outside the door talking with Christine and her husband. The matron immediately sent Vincent, who had accompanied her, to get everyone upstairs. The orders were to help the children continue getting ready for bed. Soon a line of curious children began to pass by the doorway, sneaking a peek outside on their way upstairs. Miss Johnson continued to hear all about the events from Christine. Johnny was still standing on the steps and still holding Eliza Beth. Eliza was very quiet. After being so frightened, it was enough for Johnny to hold her in his protective arms. Mary Beth hadn't left his side, once finding herself there. Mr. and Mrs. Jameson were standing at the base of the steps talking to the couple, mainly to Johnny. Though they knew about him for most of his life, they were meeting him for the first time. "Johnny," Mr. Jameson said, "I guess my wife and I have been a pretty harsh judge on you all these years. Tonight you were ready to stand up to the whole Klan alone. Not even for your own sake, but for another. Before tonight, I would have never thought an orphan capable of such a thing. I don't know what to say, other than I'm sorry." "I was really glad, sir," Johnny said while offering his right hand, "to see you coming out on my side in all this." The two men exchanged a firm handshake. Just before releasing his grip, the father said, "Son, welcome to the family. I guess we've behaved just beastly to you up until now. On all other counts, Mary Beth always has been the best judge of character in the whole family, especially that rascal Alexander. We just wouldn't listen to her when it came to you." "For my part, I'm really sorry about carting your daughter off without your permission," Johnny apologized. "It's really not how I wanted to do it all along. Son," Mr. Jameson softened his tone, "I'm the one who has been entirely unreasonable, and I drove the both of you to it. I can make it up to you by training you up to manage a department at my office. You can't get a better opportunity. I'm afraid there are many who think poorly about all orphans, as I once did." "Well, sir, it's mighty kind of you to make the offer, and I might take you up on it for a time. You'd have to understand that I have plans of my own that may take me in my own direction sooner or later." The men continued to talk for some time. Mary Beth took Eliza, who had fallen asleep in Johnny's arms, and headed upstairs to put the child to bed. Mrs. Jameson went with her. Eliza had already been ready for bed, so the two women merely tucked her in, with her arm still wrapped around Johnny's doll. Quietly, Mary Beth named off each of the girls and repeated some of the things Johnny had told her about each one, and this time she was more confident that she'd named them correctly. Eliza missed the chance to tell Johnny that she loved him. She was so disappointed about that when she awoke in the morning. She was now surer than ever that Johnny really did love her, but still she longed to hear the words come out of his mouth. Over the course of several days, the whole truth came out. It seems that the parents of Jonas Ezekiel Zilber were a wealthy Jewish couple from Germany. They both came to live in the United States as children in the days surrounding World War II. The mother contracted cancer and died, and they say her husband mainly died from a broken heart. In his grief, he neglected himself so badly that his health rapidly declined. They left behind a baby son as the only heir to their fortune. Their housekeeper, Martha Phillips, and her husband Jacob somehow managed to adopt the baby and thereby get their hands on the fortune. Some say they conned the ailing father into signing a bogus will. She and her husband moved to Lawford and tried to pass themselves off as family from old money. The wife was so coarse and crass that most never ceased to doubt the claim. The only thing to the couple's credit was treating Jonas as their own flesh and blood. They ensured Jonas Phillips knew none of these facts. His new parents tried to dissuade Jonas from getting involved with the Ku Klux Klan, but mostly he'd done so without their knowledge, rising quietly through the ranks. Though he initially joined them for his own purposes, over time he'd grown to believe their mantra. They believed that Jews, along with black folks, were inferior. He came to believe in his superiority even over his fellow Klansmen. It was quite a shock to him to learn that he was in fact Jewish, and now he wasn't sure what to believe, either about himself or about his race. In more practical matters, the mayor found himself ousted from the Klan, and all his business partners moved away from him as quickly as possible. Even his old friend Judge Ransom distanced himself. It would never do, especially not now with all sorts of new legislation for equal rights, for an elected judge to be joined at the hip with the Klan,